age of 16. So now I'm going to go into a little bit of firearms nomenclature. I'm going to go into talking about revolvers and semi-automatics. Pretty sure everybody here is using semi-automatics. That's what pretty much everybody uses. But if you're not familiar with it, I like to go over revolvers. We go over it in the academy as a familiarization, because if you're in law enforcement, you're probably going to run into guns now and then, and you need to at least be familiar with it, so you know how to unload it, you know how to safely operate it, and things such as that, and just be able to identify what it is. So you got some common pistol action types. You got the revolver, which we all know what a revolver is, right? There's nobody here that does not know what a revolver is. Semi-automatic pistol. So as far as the revolvers, you got two main types. You got a single action, which is like the old Western style, where when they come out, they have to cock the hammer first and then they fire it, because if you just come out and pull the trigger, nothing's going to happen, because it's single action. You have to cock the hammer back for it to fire. Trigger performs a single action, releasing the hammer. Hammer must be manually cocked before each shot. Then you have double action. That's a pretty hard, long trigger pull when you have a double action revolver. So basically, you're drawing the gun out, you're pulling the trigger. As you pull the trigger, the hammer is going to come all the way back, and then at a certain point, it's going to slam back forward, and that's your double action. Trigger performs both tasks, both by cocking and releasing the hammer. Most double action revolvers can also be fired single action. So yes, even though it's a double action, you can pull the trigger to perform both tasks. You can still cock it first and then shoot it like a single action. It's actually a lot. The gun's accurate because the gun's accurate if it's manufactured well and the person shooting it knows what they're doing. But if any of you guys have ever shot double action, it's a really long trigger pull. So usually those long trigger pulls for that are not your best shots. But if you're shooting it in semi-automatic mode, where all you got to do is pull the trigger and it goes forward, your shots are usually more accurate, because you're not having to hold the gun and put as much effort into pulling the trigger. So here's one of the old style single action revolvers. Got the trigger, the hammer spur, cylinder, ejector rod, and the loading gate. So if you're not that familiar with these, basically, and you've probably seen enough westerns where you see the guy roll the cylinder on his arm or his leg or something like that. So you take this loading gate, flip it up, and basically you have to take the hammer and you have to like half cock it in order for it to release the cylinder, and then you put a round in, turn it, put a round in, turn it until you get all 6 rounds in there, and then you close that back. So on the opposite side of that, whenever you're trying to unload it, you've got this ejector rod, so basically the same principle applies after you've shot it. Loading gate, you open it up, hit the ejector rod, and it pushes the round out, each one at a time, and that casing comes out. Double action revolver, it's pretty much got the same parts to it. You got your trigger, hammer spur, cylinder. On this one though, you have the cylinder release catch, because the cylinder actually pops out to the side, and then you can load your rounds that way, or you can unload the rounds. You got your ejector rod. With the ejector rod on this, basically the cylinder comes out, the rod comes with it, and as you hit the plunger on that ejector rod, a little star-looking thing will come out, and I'm just going to call it star-looking thing because I'm not familiar with the exact nomenclature of it. And basically all 6 or 5, depending on the gun you have, or sometimes 9 if you got a little 22, all those casings will come out. And if you guys have seen the speed loaders they used to have with these, so basically you have like either 5 or 6 rounds depending on the gun you got, and it sits on it like a little cap, and then you turn a little thing and it locks them in place. And so you used to carry them on your magazine carrier or speed loader carrier. So when you would get that out, open it up after you fired your rounds, the cylinder release catch, turn it upside down, let gravity help you, hit that ejector rod, the rounds will come out, then you flip it back down, let gravity help you too, get that speed loader, line up the rounds in the cylinder, and then you just turn that little speed loader and they all should drop in there. And I tried that a couple of times. I've seen some guys, I've seen video guys that can do it really fast. I mean, it's almost like they throw them in there and they're back in and ready to go. Me, I'm like kind of line it up and just give me a semi-automatic any day. That being said, you have less malfunctions with a revolver than you will with a semi-automatic, because semi-automatic has a lot of moving parts to it. So obviously the more moving parts, the more problems you could have with it. I used to tell guys when I was an FTO, even when I worked at another agency, that they were like, hey man, I want to carry a backup gun. What should I carry? Should I carry like the same ammunition as I carry in my duty gun? I'm like, hey, that's a good idea. Because there was a time when I was carrying a Glock 17, as a full frame 9mm. I was carrying that as my duty gun, and then I had a Glock 26 as my backup, which was the baby Glock 9mm. And the good thing is the magazines for my 17 would work in my 26. So I didn't have to worry about carrying extra rounds or anything. But then again, I'm carrying another semi-automatic. So I used to tell guys, I'm like, if you want a good last resort backup gun, take a revolver. Because more than likely you're not going to have a malfunction with it. And you're at last resort anyway. So you might as well have something you know is going to work well. So either one, the thing about it is these days, semi-automatic firearms are manufactured so well that you still don't have the amount of malfunctions you used to have with the older style semi-automatics. But with a revolver, it's almost nil as far as malfunctions you have with it. So at that last resort, at least you have a gun with either 5 or 6 rounds, last resort, that you know you can rely on. All right, frame components, you got the grip panels, trigger guard, you got the rear sight, and a back strap and front strap. Now, semi-automatic pistols is what you guys are going to be using and what most people like to use. You got 4 main types. You got single action. Single action works just the same as a single action revolver, except this is an automatic or a semi-automatic. Trigger performs a single action, releasing the hammer, and the hammer must be cocked to fire, such as 1911. Everybody is familiar with 1911, right? 1911 pistol, John Browning invented. Yeah. So basically, with that gun, you have to carry it what we call cocked and locked and ready to go if you want it to come out of the holster and be able to fire. It's got a manual safety on it. There's a couple other internal safeties too. But if you had the hammer forward on that and you pulled that gun out, pull the trigger, nothing's going to happen because that hammer has to be in a cocked position for it to work. So the very first round, either you have to come out of the holster and manually cock it yourself, or you have it already cocked with the safety up, and then when you come out of the holster, you have to remember to take that safety off, and then you're ready to fire. Now, each subsequent round, because of the action of the slide going back and forth, it cocks it for you. So the very first round, it has to be cocked manually. Every time after that, because of the action of the pistol, it cocks the hammer back itself. So it's a good gun. I've got a 1911, shoots really good. The only thing about 1911s is, you see that hammer back on the gun, it's in the holster, and you're kind of like, man, the hammer's back on it. But I mean, for years and years, guys carried that, but they just train to when they carry it, they come up and flip that safety off. It's just an extra step of things you have to do, but that's basically how it works. Then you have double action, single action. The first round fired is double action mode. All subsequent rounds will be fired in single action mode. Most common type, you don't cock the hammer to fire. You can, but you don't have to. And a perfect example of that is the M9 Beretta. So it's double action the first time you pull the trigger, because the hammer can be forward, but when you pull the trigger, it lets the hammer go back all the way and then fires. In each subsequent round, the action of the gun, the slide going back, cocks it for you. So you don't have to pull the hammer back in order for it to fire. You can, but you don't have to. But that first one's double action. Anybody that's ever shot one of those, usually your first round's a little bit off because you're pulling double action. It's a longer trigger pull when you're doing that. And then you got double action only. Trigger performs 2 tasks, both cocking and releasing the firing pin, provides a consistent long trigger pull for every shot. So just like the double action revolver, where you pull the trigger and the hammer goes all the way back and then goes forward each time you pull the trigger, you do have some semi-automatics that will do that. The one that comes to mind now is anybody ever seen the Bodyguard, the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 380? That is basically, there's several other ones out there. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what they are. But basically, every time you pull the trigger, it's a long trigger pull because the hammer has to go all the way back and go forward. And it's usually like a semi-internal hammer. It's not one that like has a hammer spur that sticks out. Bodyguard is definitely one of those. We just had a guy in another class we were teaching that had one, and I'd actually forgotten about that gun, mainly because I don't like the trigger reset on it. On that gun, trigger, you know how we talked about trigger reset, and guys that haven't been on the range yet but are probably familiar with it, where basically you fire the gun, you hold the trigger back for a second, let the weapon cycle, and then you just slowly release the trigger until it resets, and then you're already ready to fire at that point. You don't have to do a full release of the trigger. Well, on a lot of those guns, especially that one, it is to reset it, you got to go all the way back forward. So it's a really long trigger pull back and forth, and that's one of the reasons I didn't like it very much. But it's a Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson makes good guns. Then you've got striker fire, which is most everybody's using these days. So in a striker fire pistol, as the trigger's pulled, there's safety mechanisms that are internal in the gun. They're disengaged. As the striker moves within the pistol, ultimately striking the primer and firing the round, provides more consistent trigger pull for every shot. Examples are Glocks. Glocks are all striker fire. The Smith & Wesson M&P, Springfield Armory XD series, and then you got your P320s that the SIGs put out with. So striker fires are really good guns. It's a consistent trigger pull. It's pretty much like a single action trigger pull every time you're pulling the trigger, so it's really good. And that's kind of the trend these days, is the striker fire weapons. So, for semi-automatic pistols, we talked about the revolver and how you got the cylinder, and that's where you put your rounds. Well, you've got little box magazines that the ammunition is fed from. Looks something similar to that. It is not a clip. You guys are grown men. When we're out in the range, I'm not going to do to you what I would do to an academy student if they call it a clip. Otherwise, you might be running berms or doing some calisthenics. Unless you're out there firing an M1 Garand or some other type of weapon such as that, you're not using a clip. You're using a magazine. A clip is different than a magazine. So, again, it's a magazine. It fires a single round each time the trigger is pulled. That's why it's called a semi-automatic, not a full automatic. Automatically extracts and ejects the empty cartridge case and inserts the new cartridge in the chamber. Cycle of action, when fired, cocks the hammer or firing pin for the next round. These are some main parts of one of the semi-automatics. That's a 1911 style there. So when I talked about certain little safeties that the 1911 has, the majority of them, obviously you've got this thumb safety here, which is just a manual thumb lever. That's a safety. There's also a little safety built into it. This little piece right here is actually spring-loaded and movable. So if you're not gripping the gun, if you were like holding the gun like this and you tried to pull the trigger, it's not going to fire because that needs to be pushed forward and engaged. So that's one of the safeties on a 1911, the majority of 1911s. So it's basically a grip safety. You have to push that in and be gripping the gun. If it's loose, then the gun's not going to fire. You have your manual safety, and then you have a safety basically, it's called a half cock, where you pull the hammer halfway back and it's stuck in that position unless you pull it all the way back. The gun won't fire. But that's for 1911. You got the frame of it, you got the barrel, slide, grip panels, trigger guard, back strap, front strap. And then we have a version of a double action, single action here. This happens to be a SIG P220. Most of them have the same parts. You got a hammer, you got a trigger, hammer spur, slide, slide stop, or slide release. Got the safety, that one happens to have a manual safety on it, and you got your takedown lever, which lets you break the gun down. You got your magazine and your magazine release. And obviously we're pretty familiar with Glocks. This is a Glock 17. Got the same basic parts to it. Got your slide, slide stop. Got your trigger, slide lock, and that's basically the slide lock, and it's also the takedown lever. If you guys are familiar with that, that actually locks the gun in together. So it locks the receiver to the front, or the lower receiver to upper receiver, and that's mainly terms that are used with an M16, but the frame and the slide, it locks those together. And in order, if you guys are pretty familiar with that, in order to break that gun down, you obviously have to make sure it's safe. The bad thing about the Glock is you actually have to pull the trigger to make it break down, just because of the mechanism inside. But once you do that, you kind of pinch that slide stop there on either side, you pull it down, and then you can break the gun down. Magazine release. So your cycle of operations for a semi-automatic. You've got loading, basically it's seating a loaded magazine into magazine well. Then you got feeding and chambering, moving the round from the magazine to the chamber by releasing the slide, picking up the round from the magazine and seating it into the chamber. Then you got locking, that's a breech into the barrel, locks into the slide. Firing, ignition of the primer and firing the cartridge. Unlocking, which is unseating the breech end of the barrel, unlocking the barrel from the slide. You got extraction, which is pulling the spent cartridge out of the chamber. Ejecting is pushing that spent cartridge out of the ejection port. And then cocking, returning the fire mechanism to fire position. And it does that same cycle of operations every time you fire a round. So a little video here.